So, Chris, welcome to Rock's blog.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, we're here to talk today about your documentary, Pasture and Storm.
Yeah.
So, we have just published a written interview where people can find out sort of very much the intricate ins and outs and all the cameras. And today, I just wanted to talk sort of more generally and about some of the points from the interview.
hmm
So, one of the things is how did you actually come to be working with Sadie and making the actual documentary?
She put out a message on Facebook, and somebody pointed me in the direction of the message, and I read it, and it was basically Sadie saying, looking for a filmmaker to sort of document a project she was working on. Um, and it was very vague. So I checked out Sadie and was very impressed with her musical background, really, as a composer, and was interested. So I just very gently reached out to her back on Facebook, sent her a link to some previous work. And she very quickly got in contact, and we had a chat. And she was speaking to a few others. And I just gave it a rough outline based on I guess, the vagueness of it, um, as to what I thought it should become, and didn't try to show how excited I was about the fact that it was, Nicholas McCarthy was on board, because I'd come across Nicholas basically through various things accidentally on television, and I've got a strange history linked back to various things with classical music. Um, so he was sort of vaguely, a little blip on my radar somehow. And then she came back and was like, I would love you to make it, Chris." I don't think she expected it to become what it became.
Okay.
But that's how I met Sadie, through Facebook, really.
So, as you mentioned, it was a very fitting project for you. What do you think she garnered from your experience and what you were talking about, how you would make the film, which made her think that you would be the right choice?
I think she told me that I came across in a very gentle way compared to some other people that she'd approached. I didn't put any pressure on her, and such, like when we were having those initial chats before she awarded the job, if you like. And I suspect that, just generally the way I shoot stills portraiture, environmental portraiture, and a couple of the shorts that, especially Tommy, the portrait of a sculptor, really resonated with her. And she was curious to ask the right questions about how that was made, what was the budget for that. There was no budget for that. Um, and what the team was. And I said, well, I'm the team. It's, if there is no budget, you can pull a few favors here and there, but you're just going to have to, you know, trust that I will produce something that hopefully you'll be very pleased and proud of.
And at what point did she see the final product? Was she offered an insight at the beginning, or was it, sight unseen, so to speak?
It was pretty much sight unseen. There was an awful lot of trust from Sadie, which was fantastic. So, I mean, she was completely hands off, as was Nicholas. They had various comments towards the end. They just wanted a little bit of adjustment here and there on certain things. But in terms of the final edit, very, very little impact from Sadie, in trying to change things. And Nicholas, the same, really. I mean, they were. I think that Sadie thought that I would probably come up, one of the first questions she asked me is, how long do you think you can make something? And I went, well, how long is a piece of string, I think I originally said it'll probably be around 5 or 6 minutes.
So how did
um,
it end up being longer?
it just became a much more fascinating journey, spending time with them, at the various locations I was filming in, and knowing what was going to come next. And it became, once I had sat down and interviewed them both, there was a lot of sort of visualization came out of that conversation, that meant going forward I wanted to shoot certain things, and the the rough storyboard, and shot list, etc., started to ramp up a bit. And I didn't put any pressure on myself to go, it's going to be 6 minutes, it's going to be 10 minutes at all. I think the first few edits were about 22 minutes, and I thought, I've got to cut it, I've got to get it under 20. And I like to try and get things to a very exact time. But this runs at 19 minutes, 10 seconds. But that's for me, it's pretty perfect. So I've left it be,
Yeah, I think you get a image of the whole world, that they live in, which is, and that's one of it's a real art in short filmmaking,
Mm,
is to be
yes,
to present the story, to sort of tell the story. You've got a bit of conflict, you've got whatever, and then to come to an end. So I think you've managed that very well.
thank you. Yeah, it was. There were a few scenes that were quite emotional in what was going on in front of the camera, and I was tempted to bring those into the edit, but in a way they were a distraction from the story. And I think that Sadie perhaps expected the final piece would be something a little bit more um, sort of technical, so almost technical in the sense of just filming them on their journey at various points, not bringing um, into the story some history about them both. That's really important, I think, to get under the skin of who you're looking at, who you're listening to, who you're watching. Um,
Yeah,
uh, yeah.
I think viewers as well, can discern the difference between something that's just kind of factual and telling us something, and then a story. And
Mm,
that's what people engage with, and that's what you're telling as well, all
mm,
about just these left-handed musicians. And I personally went and did loads of research afterwards because I had no idea. And it's a fascinating world, and sort of, and then I found, Sadie's SoundCloud and everything. So
mm.
I think, yeah, you really do have that full story in there.
Yeah, and it was I think it was a perfect storm, and all the creative meetings, in terms of what I mean by what I could bring to it, what Nicholas brings to it, not only in terms of his extraordinary skill as a concert pianist, but his personality as well. And the same with Sadie. The three of us just got on like a house on fire. We trusted each other. We were incredibly comfortable from the outset. The first day of filming was up at Nicholas's house, and it was the first time that the two of them had met in person. And
Okay.
I walked into Nicholas's kitchen, and they were like they'd known each other for years. They were instantly comfortable with each other, huge respect for each other, and that helps enormously. So there was no one was massaging an ego really, which is great, really good.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about some scenes that you had to cut. That's always, it's such a hard part of the filmmaking process. It's like killing your darlings, isn't it? How do you, because you're approaching this very much as a sole filmmaker, how
Mm.
do you make those decisions and trust yourself?
I think in terms of, I think it goes back to being of stills photography. You're putting a portfolio together, you're putting something together, a story on Instagram or something. You've got this wealth of experience of editing photographs. So as you turn the page of a portfolio, the next photograph is incredibly important. That it connects with the previous photograph. It doesn't jar in a way that it's so different. And I think that one of my mantras to students, for example, is when you're editing your portfolio together, or you're doing something creative, or you're retouching an image, if you do something to it that you think embellishes it and makes it better, keep it. But if you do something and nothing changes, then you really have to think, well, nothing's changed, therefore let's just take that metaphorical filter out. And I think with certain scenes that I looked at them and they were really powerful, but they they would jar in the edit. They would be a distraction to the flow of the story, because I wanted it to build and build.
Mm.
And I did, there's certain things I didn't want to give away about Nicholas. Quite near the end, he explains the reason that he has only one hand. The very opening scenes with Nicholas, if you don't know Nicholas, the way it's framed doesn't reveal the fact that he is missing a hand. So I think some of those scenes that got cut out they were great as standalone little scenes, but they were just going to get in the way of what preceded that scene and then what that scene cut into.
Well, yeah, I think the balance is there, and it's like you said, you're always serving the story that you're telling.
Yes, you've got to be reminded that, and I think everyone gets to a stage with anything visual. You can't see the wood for the trees. You're living with it in your head 24/7. So getting other people's, I think, as I said with you in the interview the other week, that I'm really, I'm not I'm not against people's comments and going away and thinking actually they're right. I do need to change that. You know, I'm not so I don't have that. I'm very open to people's suggestions, and after all, they are the audience at the end of the day. So if someone says something, I will think long and hard about it and go, okay, well, why don't I try that? You know, it might be a sound level, it might be a scene that needs lengthening or cutting or just moving around.
Yeah.
So having people comment towards the end of the edit when you know that it's at a stage that you're polishing it and you can shift things around a little bit was really important.
Mm. I mean, I know that's why sort of a lot of filmmakers I speak to, they'll do like friends and families viewing parties and things like that. And because that's your opportunity, as you said, if something's too loud or, you know, rather than you then sitting, you know, at the first screening or a festival. And I know filmmakers are always so acutely critical of their own work, but it's better that you've got everything there.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you do see. Um, you, I mean, I know from my own history as a photographer and a filmmaker that you come back to something 24 hours later or a week later and you go, oh, the magenta in that needs shifting, you know, or that sound is conflicting with that, the levels need changing. Yeah, I think that's just very human, really.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because I do some sessional lecturing and I hear myself talking to students in a way that I was talked to by the lecturers that I had when I was doing Art Foundation, for example. And there were certain things I was told, and they really stuck with me. One thing was that I was told is that if you've created something visual and you can put it next to your bed, so when you wake up in the morning, it's the first thing you see, and that's when you'll see the flaws in it. The other was how to use a scalpel blade properly, but
That's not so fitting.
interesting. But yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, but you have to make, you know, you do. I've just been printing 2 new portfolios, and I'm bringing in most of it's, I say 50% of it's new work shot in the last 12 months that hasn't been seen by anybody. And then I'm bringing in some classic images, and I'm not tweaking them. I'm not changing the contrast, the color of them. They just all look right still. So you do get to a stage where you go, no, enough's enough. I'm not going to change that.
I wanted to speak to you about sort of the style of a documentary, and your documentary is you're in quite small spaces and you obviously want them to be rehearsing and playing quite naturally. How do you balance you and your equipment and the fact that you're filming with making it seem like you're not, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think yeah, how you kind of remain invisible on set, so to speak. I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure if I can answer it properly because every shoot you're doing, every set you're on, every location you're in, if you're in that situation where you've got to be out of sight, out of mind, but carry on doing your job, you've just got to sort of anticipate where you shouldn't go, really, and at the same time anticipate where you can go and should go. And at the end of the day, with something like Pasture Storm, I just had to make sure that I wasn't making unnecessary noises anywhere. And you gently push the camera in closer and closer each day you're shooting, perhaps. And actually, well, it's a really good question because I hadn't really thought about how much in Pasture Storm, nobody seems to be in any way conscious of that I'm there filming, which does help embellish that, bringing the audience right in with the players.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, it's just a matter of treading carefully, wearing shoes that don't make squeaking noises, uh, things like that, really, I think. And it's always planning. Planning is the key to so much.
Yeah.
Right on the day and having a plan B. Um, there was when the piece was performed live in Sadie's hometown. Um, um, it was supposed to have happened 2 or 3 months earlier, and it was happening at a venue in Bristol. And the day before the premiere of the concert, the Queen passed away. So the venue in Bristol decided, despite ticket sales, etc., um, to cancel the concert the next day.
No.
So that had all been scouted. I knew where I was shooting, running 2 cameras. I knew how it was all going to work. So shooting the final scenes in the church was much more challenging than I'd hoped it would be, because the church, by its own nature, has restrictive views, much more restrictive views than a concert venue, which was where it was going to be originally premiered. But at the end of the day, we all agreed that actually it ending up in the church where Sadie lives and works was the right venue for it to happen in.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes these things that happen are fortuitous, sort of. There's so many situations where I speak to filmmakers and they're like, this went wrong, but then it meant that it led us to this path.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You've got to be prepared for the unexpected in that sense. And you can have a plan B, and plan B can often go awry. So
100%.
yeah, you just instinct kicks in a lot of the time, and you 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 just try and make something happen.
So you mentioned this just earlier, and this is something, yeah, I wanted to ask you. I mean, talk to me about running 2 cameras and how you balance it, how you manage it. It blows my mind. It really does.
Well, you have to you one is not being you can't run focus on one. Once you've focused, you just run the camera and walk away from it and just lock it into one scene that you're capturing while you're working the other camera. It's
Okay.
it's as simple as that. It's not ideal, but what it means is that you can at least cut from one scene to another at this, within the same scene, and it will be a very different lens. It'll be a much longer or a much wider lens on the camera that I'm not operating. It's just a thing born out of budgets. It's much better to have somebody on the camera,
Yeah.
the second camera.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is that. And shooting on mirrorless 35mm cameras makes that quite simple and easy to do.
You
Uh,
make it sound so easy. I'm very impressed.
but I think everything's very photographic the way I shoot. I'm not, I mean, I shoot stuff on the drone. The camera will run on a track occasionally, but a lot of the time there might be a little bit of a pan or tilt. But most of the time you're looking at quite a still image where the action's just happening and unfolding.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that's just born out of being a stills photographer and wanting what you're seeing in the frame to speak to you in terms of what that image, what that location is telling you in the narrative.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm not a big fan, unless it's a huge Hollywood action film where the camera's going mad, and they do like a 3-minute tape where it comes from a helicopter through a restaurant into the car and off. That's big. That's big money stuff. So obviously, but I do like quite a still, calm frame. Um, and in this case, some of the music was incredibly powerful and fast and um, challenging to listen to. So you don't need the visual image to be doing the same thing. You just need to lock it off and just let what's happening in front of the camera unfold.
Yeah. And then what about the sound recordings? I asked you in the written interview, what you've learned from the making of this film. And obviously sound is so integral to the documentary.
Yeah.
What challenges did you face, and what have you learnt in the making of Pasture and Storm?
Yeah, that was that's the thing that's frightened me the most. And I've spoken to you about it before, where I'm filming professional musicians who are right at the top of their game. If what I'm playing back to them in the final edit sounds a bit ropey, they're just not going to like it. But at the same time, I'm not trying to record something into a CD album quality. It has to sound like the scene you're looking at. So again, it was going back and just talking to a few people, and then buying into a little bit of kit that's lo-fi, but does an incredibly good job in terms of being able to record atmospheric sound in a space, as well as just running shotgun mics into it for interviews and more controlled sound. So it was buying that and just practicing with it, and then getting to a point where you go, yeah, it sounds great. So I did some filming with someone at a piano and recorded that. Then I interviewed them. I did that a couple of times, just getting all the sound levels right and checking that it all worked. And it became very quite simple in a way. And you're then recording sound into that device. You're recording the same noise, the same sound directly into the camera, and you're just then marrying the two up in post at the edit. So you've got an easier job editing the sound that's been recorded off camera to the sound that's gone into camera, but the sound going into camera is it's just there as a guide track to bring in the proper sound. And yeah, that was something I was really pleased with and came away feeling really chuffed with that.
Yeah.
Uh, at the end of the day, it was again, it's a budget-led thing. If there's a budget there, you're going to bring it can only be better if you've got a sound recordist there doing it for you.
Yeah. But
So
this is why it's so, it's so fascinating to speak to filmmakers and smaller sets. And I mean, I'm sure if you speak to somebody who's on these huge sets with everyone, then it's not as much of a dynamic or interesting conversation, in my opinion. I think, where you learn these things, and then it's all these things that as you move into your next productions, you're able to bring with you.
yes, absolutely. And I look at the credits and go, oh crikey, my name appears about 8 times and everything. It's a bit silly, really. But
Not at all.
it's partly conveying to the audience. Actually, the person that has edited this, shot it, put it, was instrumental in pretty much everything you were watching and listening to,
Yeah.
providing it sounds okay. I mean, if the sound sounded a bit dodgy, I think I wouldn't credit himself to it.
I mean, fair enough, fair enough.
And record
And
is
that's,
unknown.
yeah, as you said, it's good for people to know, that you were doing all of it.
Mm.
And then as well, people look at that and go, well, I could achieve that. That's something that I might be able to do.
Exactly. And I've passed that knowledge on to certainly to a few students. Whether they take that on board and go and do that and follow that, I don't know. Because it can be recorded at an incredibly high level of production for a very low price.
Absolutely. And I mean, these days, just with our phones,
Mm,
people are able to film so much. If you thought about 20 years ago, it would have been entirely different. And now, you've got films that are made entirely on phones.
exactly. And people's expectations of what they're looking at in terms of that graded quality that's come off a phone or the sound that's come off a phone, that's just inherently what they're expecting to hear now. They don't question it. So
No.
yeah, it's a lot of freedom there, more so now, I think,
Hmm.
yeah.
Were you worried recording the final sound in the church? Because obviously the acoustics are so different.
I was terrified, yes. I think that was the scariest moment because there was only going to be one chance to get that. And they did a little rehearsal in the afternoon. I just ran some tests into the camera off the Zoom equipment I was using, went off with a Mac, downloaded it, listened into it. It was fine. Um, yeah, and it was still a bit. I mean, then you're dealing with the public, and I had to put the Atmos mics in a place where I felt they were the right place, which was pretty close to the front row of the seats where people were sitting. So I was a little bit concerned that a member of the public might accidentally knock something over. We did tell them just before the curtain went up that it was being not only filmed, it was being recorded as well.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that's live, that's the kind of, you could have done it again, but there's so much that's riding on that one scene.
yes, and
Well, it comes out
yeah,
beautifully. I think the sound throughout the film, I always listen to things with headphones in, sort of quite quietly on my own, and I'm very aware of that. And
mm.
it's beautifully balanced. You really get a feeling of the music, which is obviously, such a big part of it. So I commend your sound recording.
Well, thank you. I mean, one of the scenes that got cut, talking of scenes that get cut, is Nicholas had one more piece to play, and two strings went ping on the piano, and it was completely. It was just something that he couldn't control, and he dealt with it brilliantly, and played to the audience. I mean, he's very, very good raconteur as well as a performer.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, right, okay, we're one piece down now because the piano gave out. And I didn't want to put that in because it was right at the end. I didn't want to bring that into the story. But it was one of those no one could see it coming. The piano had been checked that day, and it just decided to let go of two strings. So but it didn't impact on that night at all. There was a great atmosphere in that church throughout the concert and afterwards as well. So
Yeah. So what about now switching your aerial shots? You've got the beautiful, countryside, and as we spoke about in the interview as well, so those sort of mark the different chapters.
hmm.
How did you decide how many and what they would be? And yeah, talk us through a bit your expertise with the drone and everything.
Well, growing up as a kid as a photographer, being my hobby and passion. I mean, I've shot an enormous amount of landscape work over the years, both for my own pleasure and testing, as we call it, but also for advertising campaigns and such like. So when drones started to sort of become on our radar as photographers, I bought first one probably about 8 years ago, and managed to fly into a few trees and crash it, destroy it on a beach in Wales, etc. But I still love aerial photography, um, because if given the right script or story, it works brilliantly. I mean, everything we watch on television now or at the cinema, there is going to probably be some drone aerial photography in there, whether you like it or not. But that doesn't mean you've got to put it in. I decided quite early on that I wanted to differentiate the locations, certainly by bringing up titles saying we are, explaining we are now in we're now here or we're now there. But at the same time, I thought, well, that's not good enough. It needs something to sort of break the locations visually as well. And I just thought, well, I'll just fly the drone in various locations. The only place I didn't fly it was when they were rehearsing in Bristol, which was fine. I did think I should go back and fly it there, but I didn't. So I filmed all the other locations, Colchester, Wales, where Sadie lives, in Dorset, with the drone. I think it works really well. Yeah.
And are those difficult to edit in? I don't know. My question is with the flow of them, how
Mm.
do you know how long for them to be and because they work in all the flow of the documentary and the pace.
Yeah. I think that was dictated by going from one location to the next location and what was the last thing that was being talked about or we were listening to in location A as we go into location B, and then letting that sound drift under the drone shots and at some point come together. So you're going out of one scene, you're still hearing it, you're flying, you're hearing the next scene come in from the audio, and then we go from the sky back down to land.
Yeah.
So it was that conversation that dictated how long it flew for in the edit. I mean, I spent 2.5 days in the Peak District filming Pastureland, and I shot loads of it. And I didn't at the time intend to run that pasture drone photography at the end for the credits, but of course, when I got to doing the credits, the last scene from the church is the drone flying back out from the church as the audience is applauding. And I needed to go to the credits. So I thought, well, just go back to Pastureland and bring in some of those lovely drone shots. And so that worked really well. Otherwise, I didn't quite know what I was going to put in there. I didn't want to just fade to black and let the credits roll. I wanted there to still be a visual narrative going on.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah, you don't really. Yeah, sorry, I'm going a long-winded way about answering a
no,
question.
of course. Go.
You just make sure you've got some beautiful-looking shots that are descriptive of what it is you're trying to say, and then in the edit you go, right, okay, it needs to be at least 6 seconds long, or 10 seconds long. If it goes on for too long, it just knocks the pace down a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd rather leave people wanting more than giving them too much.
Oh, absolutely. I think otherwise as well, scenes like that, audiences, they know it might be seen as a bit of filler or something. And, yeah, you don't want them to, and that's not what you want people to focus on anyway. They're
Yeah,
sort of a really nice interlude to the story that you're telling.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, and it helps the audience understand. I mean, obviously there are titles that we're going. We're in Bristol now, or um, we're in Wales or wherever. It's important. Just having titles up's fine, but it's that sort of rams it down your throat a bit. It's then softened by the distraction of looking at that lovely aerial photography as well.
Yeah. So the film is on its festival circuit now.
Mm.
Have you had any screenings, or how have audience reception been so far?
I haven't been to many screenings yet. It's got into 3 festivals so far this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's got highly commended in another. They're all in the USA, I think, at the moment.
I
Uh,
mean, that's where a vast amount of festivals are. They've got a huge array over there.
yeah, and none of them have run yet. So a couple of the festivals that it's got into, I haven't put out on social media or anything yet, or announced it because they've got a date that they don't like people to drop in to
No,
their.
we don't like people to tell people.
Exactly. So yeah, it's kind of early days still, and I'm doing that with the lovely people at Festival Formula who are just fantastic. So that their hand holding on it all is really important.
Good. It is because I mean, creating something, you put so much of yourself, your time, your effort into it. And then I
Yeah.
think what a lot of people forget is then there's a whole journey after that. It's not where it ends.
Exactly. I mean, you're making it first and foremost in this case for Sadie and her cast of amazing musicians. You're then making it secondly for yourself, but you want it to resonate with a wider audience. Sadie wanted a record of her project,
Yeah.
uh, and I think she's got a lot. I think she would admit, she's got a lot more than that. And it was such a pleasure to make that I wanted to you then want to share it with as wider audience as possible. So you dip your toes into the worlds of festivals and start biting your fingernails and hope that it gets picked up. So yeah, when it gets back, hopefully that it will get into some UK festivals. We'll see, and I will definitely want to go and attend those. And unless someone's going to buy me a ticket to Arizona or wherever.
No, I know because it's such a wonderful point, and I love speaking to filmmakers straight after they've seen their film with an audience.
Yes,
I just think it's so amazing. You can sort of see it in their eyes that
yeah,
they've seen the reaction to people. If it's a comedy that people have laughed. When it's a documentary, when you ask them about it, I just think that's such a crucial moment that is often not really looked at. So that's one of my favorite bits to look at with people.
Yeah, and it's there's a huge honesty when you're sitting in a theatre, movie theatre at a festival, watching your work being screened with a live audience. It's slightly terrifying at the same time, but that's an amazing. That's always an honor to have and to be part of. And then the Q&As afterwards are always so often so interesting, bring out questions that sometimes you can't answer. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
um,
that's a good part of it. And then with festivals as well, it's their programming and curation, and you're seeing what your film has been put alongside of,
mm,
which is
yes,
another interesting part of it.
yeah, 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 yeah. And
So
I will try and get it to a few product. I'm gonna the next few weeks. I'm gonna start. I haven't marketed it at all. No one really knows it exists. Partly because you're entering into film festivals, so you have to keep it offline.
yeah,
There's the one there's the short trailer for it, but I am going to start marketing it quite a lot in the next 3 months, and also to try and get it in front of you know people at Sky Arts and such like, and see just to get some feedback.
absolutely. So, I mean, my final question for you is you've made two documentaries now. I assume you've caught the bug alongside your photography. And do you have an idea of what you want to focus on next? Are you already in production of something?
I thought you might ask me this. No,
Go
to be
on.
honest, I've had a lot going on with my photography and just getting this in a place into festivals. I've also moved geographically house and over the last few months, so I've just been dealing with all of that. So no, and I'm sort of waking up and going to bed at night thinking, right, well, what am I going to be making next? I've got a few very vague ideas, but nothing resonating just yet. I've got to sit down. I've got to sit down and start thinking about that properly and doing a little bit more planning.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's partly. It's also building relationships throughout the the last film, Pasture Storm, with other people who bring things on board. So I've been fortunate enough to develop a late relationship with Nanlite and Atomos. I'm going to have a chat with Canon as well, and just see. Often things will come from that. I think.
Mm.
If you don't put yourself out there and have conversations with people, it doesn't trigger perhaps as many possible inspirational ideas as it could do. And filmmakers and photographers are quite good at sort of hiding behind their cameras and their screens, working on images and not getting out as much as they should be, perhaps.
At least it's in your mind.
Yeah,
The idea of bubbling.
I'll keep you posted, Sarah. As soon as I know what I'm doing, I'll come back to you.
Brilliant.
Just so you've got you can watch this space, so to speak.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, and thank you for asking kind questions.